Get out before I call the cops. People like you don't belong in a place like this. The words came sharp, cruel, and without hesitation, cutting through the quiet air of the Empire Luxe jewelry store like a knife. For a moment, everyone froze. The other customers, the junior staff, even the security guard by the door. That was the greeting Naomi Carter received the moment she asked to see the store's most valuable diamond necklace. Before we go deeper into this shocking story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another powerful story like this. And give a like if you believe respect should never depend on appearances. Now, let me take you inside the hidden world of Empire Luxe jewelry and the undercover visit of a woman who would change everything in the span of 7 minutes. Naomi Carter, at 44 years old, was not only wealthy beyond measure but also one of the most respected self-made CEOs in America. She had built Carter Luxe Holdings from nothing, starting with handmade bracelets sold at flea markets in Atlanta, until it grew into a chain of 62 luxury jewelry stores stretching across the United States, pulling in more than $420 million a year in revenue. She was worth over $2 billion personally, featured in Forbes every year for nearly a decade, and known for donating millions to scholarships for young women of color. But despite all the success, Naomi never forgot her past. That is why, several times a year, she would arrive unannounced, undercover, in one of her own stores, to see with her own eyes whether her values were truly alive at the front lines. On this particular cold morning in New York City, Naomi had chosen the flagship store on Fifth Avenue. Empire Luxe was more than just a store. It was the crown jewel of her empire, generating almost $4 million a month. Customers came here not only for diamonds but also for prestige. Politicians, Wall Street bankers, Hollywood stars. This was their playground. And the person in charge of maintaining that playground was Victoria Hale, the store manager. Victoria was 41 years old, born into privilege in Connecticut, educated at private schools, and accustomed to treating exclusivity not as a business strategy, but as a personal weapon. In her mind, the store's reputation depended on deciding who was worthy to be served and who was not. That morning, Naomi parked her 12-year-old Toyota Camry right on the street. Stepping out without fanfare, she wore a gray sweater, jeans, and sneakers. No designer handbag, no chauffeur, no flashing diamonds, just a simple silver bracelet around her wrist, the last gift from her late mother, to most passers-by. She looked like any middle-aged woman doing her morning errands. That was the point. She wanted to test how her employees treated someone who looked ordinary. As soon as she entered the store, she noticed the subtle shift. The junior associate glanced at her, offered a polite nod, then returned to organizing inventory. The assistant manager, Daniel Brooks, raised his eyes from some paperwork, curious, but said nothing. But Victoria, the manager, watched closely. Naomi moved toward the Aurora Crown diamond display, a centerpiece worth nearly $500,000. She had designed the setting herself years ago, insisting on a rare violet tint that symbolized resilience. She wanted to see how the staff would present it, when she asked softly, "Could I see that necklace, please?" Victoria's reaction was immediate and cutting. Her lips curled in a dismissive smile, her voice honeyed but hollow. "Those pieces start at $400,000, she said. "They are reserved for serious buyers only." Naomi kept her composure, replying calmly, "I would still like to see it." Victoria's smile faded into annoyance. That was when she snapped, her words like a slap in the face. "Get out before I call the cops. People like you don't belong in a place like this." The room went silent. Daniel's pen slipped from his hand. Sophia Ramirez, a young associate barely 25, gasped softly. Jimmy Walker, the security guard, shifted uncomfortably near the entrance. Customers nearby stopped browsing, their eyes darting between Naomi and Victoria, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Naomi, steady as stone, did not raise her voice. Inside. However, memories of countless humiliations in her early years came rushing back. She remembered being told she could not enter certain stores, being followed by guards, being assumed to be less than she was. She had built her empire to ensure that no one else had to endure that kind of pain. And yet here it was, happening again. Not in someone else's business, but in her own. She looked directly into Victoria's eyes and said nothing for several seconds. That silence was heavier than any shout could have been. But Victoria, blind to the warning in Naomi's steady gaze, pressed on, reaching for her phone as if to summon the police. She muttered something about protecting the brand and keeping out trouble. Sophia took a hesitant step forward, whispering, "Ma'am, I can help you." But Victoria cut her off sharply. "Sophia, go clean the inventory in the back. This woman is wasting our time." The cruelty was naked now, and the younger staff looked away, ashamed. Naomi knew she had seen enough. This was why she came undercover. This was why she still drove that old Camry. Not for show, but because power meant nothing if she could not protect her customers from moments like this. She reached into her purse, her hands calm, her eyes never leaving Victoria. What happened in the next few minutes would not only decide Victoria's career, but would ripple across the entire company. Because Naomi Carter was not just another customer. She was the owner. She was the board. She was the one person in the world Victoria Hale should never have underestimated. Victoria Hale did not stop with her first insult. In fact, her arrogance only grew as if dismissing Naomi Carter in front of customers had given her a strange sense of power, with a voice dripping in condescension. She leaned slightly over the glass case, lowering her tone as though sharing a private joke, and said, "People come in here all the time pretending they can afford the Aurora crown, but we can tell who is real and who is wasting our time." Those words, cruel and deliberate, carried across the room and landed like stones in the ears of every staff member and customer present. Daniel Brooks shifted uncomfortably behind the counter, his business school training urging him to intervene. But his position as assistant manager left him unsure of how far he could go against his direct superior. Sophia Ramirez, the young sales associate, looked from Naomi to Victoria with a face full of disbelief, unable to reconcile the disrespect she had just heard with the values the company claimed to uphold. And Jimmy Walker, the veteran security guard who had spent years protecting citizens as a police officer before turning to retail security, felt his stomach twist as he watched the confrontation escalate in slow motion. Naomi stood still, her posture calm, her voice even. Yet the silence around her grew louder with every passing second. She had been insulted before, many times in her life, but hearing it inside her own flagship store cut deeper than she had expected. She knew she could have ended it right there by revealing who she was, but she chose not to. She wanted to see how far Victoria was willing to go, how deeply this so-called manager believed in her own power to decide who was worthy of service. Naomi's request was simple, spoken clearly and with dignity. "I would still like to see the necklace." Her tone carried no anger, only steady insistence. But Victoria recoiled as though she had been asked for something outrageous. With a forced laugh, she replied, "Do you mind telling me what the occasion is? We usually show pieces of that magnitude only when there's a special event, like an engagement, or when we know the client can afford it." The implication was obvious. Victoria was searching for a reason to disqualify Naomi, to push her away politely if possible, or publicly if necessary. Naomi raised her eyebrows ever so slightly, but answered with grace. "Does it matter?" That was the moment when the balance of the room shifted. Several customers stopped pretending to browse and turned openly toward the scene. Phones began to appear in quiet hands, cameras opening, lenses pointed discreetly but deliberately. This was New York, after all, where nothing scandalous stayed private for long. Victoria noticed but dismissed it. In her mind, she still believed she controlled the narrative. She bent down, pulled a key from her pocket, and reluctantly unlocked the glass case, sliding it open with exaggerated caution, as if she were guarding crown jewels from a thief. Her body leaned forward protectively. Her hands hovered over the velvet display tray. Her every gesture screamed suspicion. She moved slowly, clearly hoping Naomi would get impatient and leave. But Naomi leaned in with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades studying craftsmanship. She examined the necklace closely, then spoke with quiet authority. "The cut on this stone is exceptional. Colombian origin." Victoria froze. That was not the comment of a casual window shopper. That was the remark of an expert. "How did you... yes," she stammered, caught off guard, but quickly recovered her defensive tone. "Our pieces are crafted by master jewelers, the finest in the industry." Naomi nodded, not combative, merely precise. "I'm sure they are, but the prongs on this setting are uneven. It could be improved." The word struck Victoria like an insult. No one dared criticize the merchandise in her store, least of all someone she had already judged unworthy. Her jaw tightened, and she straightened up, glaring down at Naomi as if daring her to say more. That was when the front door chimed and in walked the Harringtons, a wealthy white couple well known to the staff. They were regular clients, an old banking family with deep roots on the East Coast. Victoria's demeanor transformed instantly. Her smile brightened, her voice lifted, her entire posture shifted from defensive hostility to eager hospitality. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, how wonderful to see you," she exclaimed, abandoning Naomi mid-sentence. "Are you here for your anniversary gift?" Within seconds, the Harringtons were escorted to comfortable chairs, offered champagne, and treated like royalty, while Naomi stood alone by the open case, invisible to the very manager who should have been leading by example. Sophia's eyes darted nervously between Naomi and Victoria, her conscience pulling her toward action. She approached Naomi quietly, offering a genuine smile. "Ma'am, is there anything I can help you with?" The kindness in her tone was unmistakable, but before Naomi could answer, Victoria's voice sliced through the room. "Sophia, the back inventory needs organizing, now." The order was sharp, calculated, designed to isolate Naomi further. Sophia hesitated, her lips parted in protest, but one look at Victoria's glare forced her to retreat. Naomi's eyes softened toward Sophia, and she whispered, "It's all right, dear. I'll wait." And so she did, for 15 long minutes. Naomi stood alone as Victoria fawned over the Harringtons, showing them piece after piece, pouring champagne, sharing the history of each diamond as though Naomi had ceased to exist. Every second was a test, every gesture a betrayal of the company's values Naomi had worked 2 decades to build. Customers nearby watched the unequal treatment unfold, some whispering to one another, others raising their phones higher, recording every detail. The humiliation was deliberate, and Naomi felt it in her bones. But instead of walking out, instead of revealing her identity, she chose patience. She wanted to see how far the rot had spread when the 15 minutes had passed. Naomi stepped forward once again, her voice calm, her words clear. "Excuse me. I am still interested in the Aurora crown." Victoria turned to her with barely concealed annoyance, as if she had been interrupted rudely. "Look," she said, her voice colder now, "those pieces require serious financial commitment. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in our fashion jewelry section." Fashion jewelry, the cheapest corner of the store, pieces under $500, a far cry from the $500,000 necklace Naomi had asked to buy. The insult was not hidden anymore. It was blunt, open, and cruel. Naomi's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "I'd like to purchase the Aurora crown necklace, the $480,000 piece." Victoria laughed. Not a polite laugh, not even a nervous laugh, but a genuine, mocking laugh, as though Naomi had just told a ridiculous joke. "I'll need to see proof of funds," she said with a smirk. "Credit cards, bank statements, something that shows you can actually afford this." The double standard was obvious to everyone watching. The Harringtons had been shown pieces worth just as much without a single question about their finances. But Naomi, a black woman in simple clothes, was being asked to prove her worth in front of strangers. The injustice was stark, humiliating, and unforgettable. And in that moment, Naomi Carter decided the time for patience was over. Naomi Carter did not flinch when Victoria Hale demanded proof of funds. Instead, she let the silence hang in the air, her eyes steady, her voice calm, repeating slowly so there could be no misunderstanding. "I would like to purchase the Aurora crown necklace, the piece priced at $480,000. The room seemed to tilt as those words settled over the staff and customers alike, for no one expected a woman dressed in jeans and a sweater to speak so directly about $500,000. But Victoria only laughed louder, her arrogance unmasked, her tone filled with mockery as she sneered. "Do you really expect me to believe that? You don't even look like someone who could afford a weekend in this city, let alone a diamond of this caliber." That final jab landed harder than anything before, and gasps echoed from corners of the store. Sophia Ramirez froze behind the counter, her heart pounding in outrage. Daniel Brooks put down his pen, his instincts screaming that disaster was unfolding before his eyes. Jimmy Walker shifted his stance, his training as a former officer telling him this was no longer just poor service. This was a public humiliation spiraling into something dangerous. Naomi's voice remained level, but the steel in her words was undeniable as she asked, "Is this how you treat every customer who enters this store?" Victoria scoffed. Her face flushed, her composure cracking as she waved a dismissive hand. "Don't play games with me. People like you wander in off the street, wasting our time, hoping to touch things you can't possibly buy. This is Empire Luxe, not a thrift shop." The cruelty was naked, and the Harringtons, seated nearby, shifted uncomfortably, no longer able to pretend they were not part of the scene. The old couple avoided Naomi's eyes, embarrassed by the preferential treatment they had received. But Victoria, blinded by her own prejudice, plowed forward, raising her voice so that the entire store could hear. "Get out now before I have security escort you out. We don't need thieves masquerading as customers." The insult was devastating in its directness. She had crossed a line from subtle exclusion to open accusation. Naomi stood taller, her face still calm but her presence commanding, and answered with 5 words that shifted the entire atmosphere. "I will not leave here." The declaration hung heavy in the air, powerful and immovable, as though she had planted a flag on contested ground. Every head turned, every phone was raised higher, recording the unfolding storm. Victoria's temper snapped. She spun toward Jimmy and barked, "Remove her immediately! Do your job!" Jimmy hesitated, his eyes flickering from Victoria's red face to Naomi's calm composure. In his gut, he knew this was wrong. "Ma'am, are you certain?" he asked carefully, his voice low, almost pleading. Victoria erupted. "Yes, I am certain. She is a disruptive presence and a potential thief. If you don't do it, you're fired." The word "fired" carried across the store like a gunshot. Sophia gasped audibly. Daniel's stomach sank, and several customers exchanged horrified glances. Naomi's expression did not change, but inside she felt a deep fury rising. Not a wild rage, but a cold, measured anger born of years of surviving slights, insults, and barriers. She reached into her purse, not fumbling, not rushed, but with the deliberate motion of someone who knew exactly what she was about to do. "You want to talk about firing people?" she said softly, so softly that every person leaned closer, holding their breath. "Then let us talk." Victoria, oblivious to the warning, raised her chin defiantly. "Yes, let's. This is my store, and I will decide who stays and who goes." Naomi's eyes sharpened like a blade, her voice dropping to a tone that carried more power than shouting ever could. "Your store?" The question landed like thunder, and for the first time, Victoria faltered, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Yes," she snapped, doubling down. "My store, and I will not have it degraded by people who don't belong." That was the breaking point. The crowd audibly reacted, some in disbelief, some with disgust, because everyone knew what Victoria meant. She had stripped away any pretense and revealed the raw prejudice beneath her words. Daniel stepped forward, his voice shaking but resolute. "Patricia, please stop," he pleaded, using her name as a lifeline, but she spun on him like a cornered animal. "Stay out of this, Daniel, or you're next." Sophia's hand covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears, while Jimmy remained frozen, unwilling to drag out a customer who had done nothing wrong. Naomi held her phone now, her thumb moving across the screen with steady precision, and when she raised it to her ear, her voice was crisp, commanding, the voice of someone used to being obeyed. "Yes, this is Naomi Carter. Emergency meeting with the board, now." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. The name Naomi Carter rang out, familiar yet unreal. Customers looked at one another, whispering, and Sophia, trembling, grabbed her phone to search quickly. Within seconds, her screen displayed a company newsletter, the smiling face of the woman now standing before them. Under the headline, "CEO Spotlight, Building Carter Lux into a National Treasure." Her gasp was so loud it broke the tension, and she turned the screen toward Daniel, who paled as recognition crashed over him. Naomi continued calmly into the phone, her eyes never leaving Victoria's face. "Yes, I'm at the Fifth Avenue flagship. We have a severe violation of policy, discrimination, harassment, a betrayal of every value this company stands for. Get everyone on the line." Victoria's mouth opened and closed, words failing her as realization dawned. She stammered, You can't be." But Naomi cut her off, lowering the phone with deliberate care, her gaze sharp and unrelenting. "Can't be what? Victoria? Can't be successful? Can't be wealthy? Can't be the owner of the store you just claimed was yours?" Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. Daniel's chest tightened, and Jimmy finally stood at attention, as though recognizing the true chain of command. Customers recorded with trembling hands, whispering, "She's the CEO. She owns this place." Victoria staggered back, her world crumbling in real time. But Naomi showed no triumph, only quiet authority as she declared, "You violated every principle this company stands for, and now you will face the consequences." The humiliation was complete, but the reckoning had only just begun. The moment Naomi Carter's name echoed through the store, the air seemed to shift, heavy with realization, but Victoria Hale refused to surrender her illusion of control. Instead, she clung to it desperately, her voice cracking as she shouted, "This is some kind of trick. You're lying. No customer talks to a board of directors like that." She jabbed her finger toward Naomi with a trembling hand, her anger tangled with fear, her tone rising so high that every chandelier seemed to rattle under the weight of her desperation. Naomi did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm composure was more terrifying than any rage could have been, and she answered with deliberate slowness. "I told you who I am, Victoria, and every second you deny it is another second you dig yourself deeper." Victoria's eyes darted around the store, searching for support. But she found none. Daniel Brooks, the assistant manager who had tried so carefully to de-escalate, now stood stiff, his loyalty to the brand outweighing his fear of confrontation. Sophia Ramirez, the young associate with tears still on her cheeks, whispered softly to a nearby customer, "She really is the CEO. Look," and showed her phone screen with Naomi's face on the company website. The customer gasped. Others leaned in, and soon murmurs spread like wildfire through the store. Jimmy Walker, the security guard, planted his feet squarely on the marble floor, his arms crossed, no longer following Victoria's orders but awaiting Naomi's. Yet Victoria, blinded by pride, still raged, her cheeks flushed, her hair slipping from its perfect style, her once polished image unraveling under the fluorescent lights. She screamed at Naomi, "Even if you are who you say you are, you embarrassed this store, you disrupted my customers, you degraded our reputation." Her words tumbling out like a flood of excuses. Naomi tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing, her voice low, almost tender, but sharp enough to cut glass. "Whose reputation? Victoria? Yours? Or the company's? Because the company's reputation was built on respect, on dignity, on trust, and you destroyed all three the moment you decided that my appearance mattered more than my words." Gasps echoed again, and for the first time. Victoria's knees wavered as though the weight of truth pressed down on her shoulders. Still, she tried one last desperate defense, pointing toward the Harringtons, who were now shrinking in embarrassment in their seats. "These are my real clients. This is who we serve. People who belong here." The words poisoned the room. The Harringtons rose slowly, the wife clutching her husband's arm, and said in a voice strained with shame, "We want no part in this," before walking out quietly, their champagne glasses left behind like symbols of a crumbling facade. The crowd of onlookers, once passive, now shifted with energy, some nodding, some whispering, all recording the spectacle of a manager self-destructing in real time. Naomi let the silence linger, every second a lesson, before speaking again with authority. "You see, Victoria, it is not your job to decide who belongs. That is the first and last mistake of prejudice. It assumes power where there is none. The only power you had was to treat people with respect, and you failed." Her words rang like a gavel striking in court, final and irrevocable. Victoria staggered, her face contorted, and in her desperation she turned on Daniel, snapping, "Why are you just standing there? Do something! Support me! Prove your loyalty!" Daniel inhaled deeply, his voice shaking but resolute. "My loyalty is to this company's values, and those values are not what you've shown today." The rejection struck Victoria like a physical blow, her shoulders collapsing, but she still turned to Jimmy with venom, shouting, "Then you, escort her out, or I swear you're finished." Jimmy stepped forward, his voice steady, firm, a voice trained to maintain order. "Ma'am, with respect, I don't take orders from you anymore. She's the CEO. You're the one who's finished." That was the breaking point. The moment the entire room understood that the illusion of Victoria's authority had shattered completely. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Her chest heaved, her eyes wide, darting between employees who no longer stood with her, customers who now judged her, and phones that captured every trembling second of her downfall. Naomi, still calm, spoke with quiet finality. "This is not just about one insult. It is about every subtle glance, every dismissive tone, every door closed in someone's face because of who they are or what they look like. And I will not allow my company to become a place where dignity is optional." She reached once more for her phone, this time not to call the board but to press record, turning the camera toward herself and speaking directly into it, her eyes sharp, her words deliberate. "To our employees, our customers, and the world watching, This is not the Empire Lux standard, and it will never be tolerated. Justice begins here. The crowd erupted in murmurs, some in awe, some clapping softly, the sound building into a wave of support. Victoria finally collapsed into one of the velvet chairs she had reserved for wealthy clients, her mascara streaking down her face, her once flawless posture reduced to a trembling shell. Naomi looked at her one last time, her voice carrying both judgment and sorrow. You had a choice, Victoria. You could have chosen kindness. You could have chosen respect. But you chose arrogance. And now, you will live with the consequences. The room stood still, the story captured from every angle, and though Victoria still begged quietly, "Please, I can change. I didn't mean it." Everyone knew the breaking point had passed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The store had fallen so quiet that even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed loud, and all eyes stayed fixed on Naomi Carter as she stood calmly, phone in hand, her presence commanding every inch of the space. And in that silence came the words that no one present would ever forget. My name is Naomi Carter. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Carter Lux Holdings, and this is my store. The reaction was immediate and electric. Sophia Ramirez gasped and pressed her trembling hands to her mouth. Daniel Brooks turned pale as the truth struck him like a thunderclap. Jimmy Walker straightened his stance like a soldier recognizing his commanding officer. And the customers who had been quietly filming all leaned forward in shock as the realization washed over them. This woman they had seen mocked, belittled, and nearly thrown out was the very owner of the empire itself. Naomi let her words linger, her gaze fixed firmly on Victoria Hale, who sat collapsed in the velvet chair, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her arrogance drained away, her power gone. And for the first time since the confrontation began, she could not speak. Naomi continued with a calm authority, her voice steady, carrying across the marble and glass like a judgment handed down from the bench. For the past 20 minutes, you have humiliated a customer who did nothing more than ask to see jewelry in a store that belongs to her. And in doing so, you have humiliated yourself, your staff, and the very values this company was built on. Her words were measured but devastating, each one sinking deeper into the stunned silence. Naomi turned, addressing not just Victoria, but the room itself, the employees, the customers, the dozens of phones recording. Empire Lux was created to be more than a place of wealth. It was created to be a place of belonging, because I know what it feels like to be told you don't belong, and I swore no one would feel that way in my stores. The older gentleman near the counter nodded slowly, whispering "Amen" under his breath, and a few customers clapped softly, though quickly stilled by the gravity of the moment. Victoria tried to find her footing, her voice hoarse as she stammered, "I didn't know. I never meant." But Naomi cut her off gently but firmly. "You meant every word, Victoria, every glance, every insult, every assumption. You didn't treat me this way because you thought I was someone else. You treated me this way because of what you saw on the surface, and that is why you can no longer represent this company." The words landed with finality, and Victoria's eyes filled with panic as she pleaded, "Please, I have children, a mortgage. I was only trying to protect the store." Naomi shook her head, her tone not cruel but resolute. "Protect the store? Whose store? You called it yours. You forgot that this brand doesn't belong to arrogance. It belongs to every customer who walks through these doors and deserves to be seen with dignity." Sophia's tears spilled freely now, overwhelmed by both relief and pride as she whispered, "Thank you," under her breath, while Daniel looked on in awe at the quiet strength unfolding before him. Naomi then shifted her attention, her words warm but firm as she turned to the others. "Daniel, you tried to intervene when you saw this was wrong, and though you were silenced, your instinct was correct. Sophia, you showed kindness even when ordered not to. And that is the heart of this company. Jimmy, you refused to act on an order you knew was unjust. And that is integrity. Each name, each acknowledgement, was like a gift, affirming the values she had always preached, showing the world that loyalty to principle mattered more than loyalty to position. Then she looked back at Victoria, who was now openly sobbing, her body shaking, her makeup ruined, and delivered the final verdict. Victoria Hale, as of this moment, you are terminated from employment at Carter Lux Holdings. The words were crisp, final, leaving no space for negotiation, and gasps echoed through the store as the reality set in. Victoria's hands trembled, clutching her face, her voice barely audible as she begged, "Don't do this. I can change. Give me one more chance." But Naomi's reply was unwavering. Second chances are given to those who stumble, not to those who trample others. You made your choice, and now you must live with it. Victoria collapsed further into the chair, her sobs filling the quiet, while the customers kept filming, capturing every painful detail of the fall from power. Naomi then turned to the onlookers, her voice lifting, carrying the full weight of her leadership. To our customers, I say this. What you witnessed today is not the standard of Empire Lux. It is the betrayal of it, and I promise you this will never happen again. The room erupted in quiet applause, not thunderous but heartfelt, a recognition of justice served. Naomi, still calm, still composed, slipped her phone back into her purse with deliberate care, like a judge setting down a gavel after delivering sentence. For a moment she stood in silence, scanning the room, letting every face absorb the truth that prejudice had been exposed and punished not with vengeance, but with firm, dignified justice. The Harringtons, who had returned briefly to collect their belongings, bowed their heads to Naomi before leaving, humbled by the sight of true leadership. Victoria, broken, gathered her belongings into a small box handed to her by Daniel, her hands shaking, her sobs quieter now but still audible, the sound of a career ending. Naomi looked at her one final time and said softly, almost sadly, "You built walls where there should have been doors, and that is why your time here is over." The line was simple, but it carried the weight of 20 years of lessons, of a woman who had clawed her way to the top and remembered every closed door along the way. The customers in the store knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just a confrontation but a revelation, not just a firing but a reckoning. Phones buzzed as videos uploaded to social media, and within minutes, millions of eyes would see what had happened here. But in this moment, within these walls, the truth was enough. Naomi Carter had revealed herself, had defended the dignity she built her empire upon, and had reminded every person present that power is not about wealth. It is about the courage to stand unshaken in the face of injustice. The store had transformed into a stage, every eye fixed on Naomi Carter, every camera capturing the moment when justice became not just a word, but an action. And as Victoria Hale sat hunched in her chair, broken and humiliated, Naomi straightened her posture, lifted her chin, and spoke with the authority of someone who had nothing to prove yet everything to defend. Let this be clear to every person here. Discrimination will never be tolerated in my company. Not for a second, not for an instant. And today you have seen what happens when the values of Carter Lux are betrayed. Her words carried across the marble like a final decree, and the weight of them sank deep into the hearts of her staff. For they understood this was not just about one manager losing her job, it was about an entire culture being corrected. She turned to Daniel Brooks first, her tone shifting from judgment to affirmation. "Daniel, you saw the wrong and you tried to stop it. You showed courage when silence would have been easier. From this moment forward, you are the manager of this flagship store, and I expect you to set a standard so high that no one will ever question it again." Daniel's eyes widened, his mouth opening in disbelief, his chest tightening with both pride and responsibility. And though his voice shook, he managed to say, "Yes, ma'am. I won't let you down." Naomi then looked to Sophia Ramirez, the young associate whose compassion had shone through the ugliness. "Sophia, your instinct to show kindness is exactly why I built this company. And for that, you are now the assistant manager. Because this store needs leaders who remember that respect is never optional." Sophia's tears flowed freely now, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of recognition, and she whispered a soft thank you that trembled with sincerity. Then Naomi's eyes fell on Jimmy Walker, the security guard who had refused to act unjustly, his back straight, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression solemn, and she said firmly, "Jimmy, integrity under pressure is rare, and you showed it today. For that, you will receive a commendation and a raise, because this company values judgment over blind obedience." Jimmy gave a nod, his throat tightening, his voice low but steady as he replied, "Thank you, ma'am. It was the right thing to do." Customers clapped softly, some wiping away tears, others nodding in quiet agreement, recognizing that they had just witnessed the promotion of character over appearance, of principle over prejudice. Naomi then returned her gaze to Victoria, who had gathered her belongings into a small box, her face streaked with tears, her career reduced to ashes, and though Naomi felt no joy in her downfall, she spoke with unyielding certainty. "Victoria Hale, you are no longer employed by Carter Lux Holdings. Security footage has captured every moment. Witness accounts and recordings are already spreading. And this is not just the end of your time here. It is the end of the illusion that arrogance can hide behind authority." Victoria sobbed, begging one last time, "Please, I can change. Please don't do this to me." But Naomi's answer was final. "Change is not a promise made when caught. It is a choice lived every day. And today you showed the world exactly who you are." With that, she gestured gently to Jimmy, not to drag Victoria out, but to escort her with dignity. And Jimmy guided her toward the door as customers parted quietly, some whispering disapproval, others filming her slow walk of shame. The sound of the door closing behind her was like a seal, a moment marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Naomi then turned back to the crowd, her voice lifting not only for those in the room, but for the millions she knew would soon see these words online. To those watching, know this: Carter Lux is committed to equality, to dignity, to respect, and if you ever walk into one of our stores and are not treated with those values, then you call me, because my name is not just on the building, it is on the promise that no customer will ever be made to feel lesser here. Applause rose, stronger now, not hesitant but unified, and several customers stepped forward to shake her hand, one elderly man saying, "Ma'am, I've lived a long life, and I've never seen leadership like that." And Naomi, her face softening, replied warmly, "Leadership is not about titles, it is about choices." Daniel and Sophia began directing staff back to their duties, eager to prove worthy of the trust placed in them, while Naomi stepped aside to answer the flood of calls now buzzing through her phone. Major news outlets were already aware. Social media was exploding with clips labeled "Empire Discrimination" and "CEO Reveals Herself," and hashtags were trending across platforms within hours. It would dominate national conversation, and Naomi knew she had to meet that moment not with fear, but with vision. She dialed her communications director, her voice crisp. "Prepare a statement, emphasize reforms, emphasize accountability, and announce the launch of the Carter Integrity Fund. $10 million dedicated to training, monitoring, and supporting employees who choose respect." Her team, shocked but responsive, moved quickly to follow her orders. By the end of the day, the press release was out, interviews were booked, And the story was no longer just about one manager's prejudice. It was about how a company and its leader responded. For the staff inside the store, the lesson was unforgettable. They had seen the downfall of arrogance and the rise of integrity, all in the span of less than an hour. For Victoria Hale, the reckoning extended beyond termination. Within days, her name and face were all over the news, labeled as the manager who tried to throw the CEO out of her own store. And though she begged for sympathy, the world saw only the arrogance caught on camera. Job offers vanished. Her reputation in luxury retail destroyed. Her apartment in Manhattan eventually sold to cover debts as she struggled to find footing in an industry that had no place for her anymore. For Naomi, the reckoning was not about one person's fall, but about the future of her company. She gathered her board that same evening, played the recordings in full, and secured unanimous support for sweeping reforms, mandatory training, anonymous reporting hotlines, AI monitoring of service interactions, and direct customer feedback channels. The company's stock dipped briefly under the weight of the scandal, but within a week it rebounded stronger than ever as customers rallied to support a brand that chose transparency over cover-ups. The reckoning was both personal and systemic. A reminder that silence in the face of prejudice is complicity, and that leadership means not just building wealth, but defending dignity. As Naomi left the store that evening, she paused by the Aurora crown display, the diamond necklace still gleaming under the lights, and whispered softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "It is never about the diamond, it is about the people who touch it." And with that, she walked out into the night, her Camry waiting at the curb, her mission clear, her resolve unbroken, her legacy sealed by the reckoning she had delivered with grace and strength. 1 week after the confrontation at Empire Luxe Fifth Avenue, the story had spread far beyond the walls of that glittering store. It had become a national conversation, a parable of leadership, prejudice, and justice, replayed millions of times on screens across America. And Naomi Carter found herself at the center of it all, not because she had sought the spotlight, but because the truth refused to stay hidden. Videos of the incident had amassed over 20 million views. Hashtags like Empire Reckoning and Respect at Luxe trended for days. And mainstream outlets from CNN to the Wall Street Journal ran headlines about the CEO who went undercover and fired her own manager after witnessing blatant discrimination. Some called it shocking, some called it inspiring, but all agreed it was unforgettable for the staff inside the company. The ripple effects were immediate. Daniel Brooks, barely a week into his new role as store manager, set a tone of humility and vigilance, holding meetings every morning with his team where he repeated Naomi's words. Respect is never optional, and under his guidance, sales did not drop as many feared. Instead, they rose 17%. Customers flocking to the store not just for diamonds, but for the reassurance that this was a place where their dignity would be protected. Sophia Ramirez, promoted to assistant manager, became a symbol for young employees across the chain, proof that kindness was noticed, rewarded, and essential. She began mentoring new hires, teaching them not only how to handle gems, but how to see the people holding them. And her story inspired dozens of letters from young women across the country who wrote, "You showed me that integrity matters." Jimmy Walker, the once quiet guard, found himself interviewed on local news where he spoke with simple honesty. "I just did what was right. I couldn't put my hands on someone who hadn't done anything wrong." And his calm integrity earned him not only a commendation, but an outpouring of respect from strangers who called him the conscience of that day. For Victoria Hale, the aftermath was devastating in ways even she could not have imagined. Clips of her mocking laugh and cruel dismissal were replayed endlessly. Memes and commentary labeled her the manager who threw away her career in 7 minutes, and her once promising reputation in luxury retail collapsed overnight. She applied for other jobs, But background checks and viral videos followed her, and soon she was forced to sell her Manhattan condo, retreating into obscurity. A cautionary tale of arrogance exposed. Naomi did not gloat. She did not celebrate Victoria's fall. But in board meetings, she reminded her executives, "This is what happens when values are forgotten. We cannot build on wealth alone. We must build on dignity." The Carter Integrity Fund, announced just days after the scandal, launched with $10 million dedicated to anti-bias training, employee support, and customer advocacy programs, and it became a model studied by other luxury brands scrambling to address their own blind spots. Lawmakers in New York even cited the incident in hearings about racial bias in retail, and Naomi was invited to testify before a Senate committee where she spoke plainly. Discrimination is not just a moral failure, it is a business failure. It destroys trust, and without trust, no enterprise can last. Her testimony was replayed across the nation, her calm voice reminding millions that the battle for respect begins in everyday interactions. For Naomi personally, the legacy of that day went deeper than numbers or headlines. On a quiet Sunday morning, she returned alone to the Fifth Avenue store, not in disguise this time, but openly, greeted with warm smiles from Daniel, Sophia, and Jimmy. She walked to the Aurora Crown display, the same case where the confrontation began, and noticed once again that the glass panel was slightly crooked. She smiled faintly, placed her hands on the edges, and straightened it until it was perfectly aligned. That small act carried a weight no one else could fully grasp. For to Naomi, it symbolized her mission, correcting what was bent, restoring what was meant to shine. Customers that morning approached her shyly, some shaking her hand, others thanking her, and one elderly woman with gray hair and gentle eyes told her, "You showed us all that grace is stronger than anger." Naomi's eyes softened as she touched the silver bracelet on her wrist, the old one from her mother, and whispered, "Grace is always necessary." In the months that followed, Carter Luxe Holdings not only survived the scandal but thrived, opening 4 new stores, seeing record profits, and earning praise for becoming a leader in corporate responsibility. But beyond the balance sheets, the real measure of success was the trust customers felt when they walked through the doors, knowing they would be treated with dignity, and so the legacy of justice endured, not written in marble or diamonds, but in the lived experiences of thousands of employees and customers who knew that one woman had refused to stay silent, had refused to walk away, had chosen instead to reveal who she was and to remind the world that true power is not about wealth or titles. It is about standing unshaken in the face of injustice. As Naomi left the store that day, stepping once more into her old Toyota Camry parked on Fifth Avenue, reporters called out, cameras flashed, but she waved gently and said only this, "I didn't build this company to prove I belonged. I built it to create a place where everyone belongs." Those words would be quoted, shared, and remembered, a simple truth carved from years of struggle and triumph, and in the hearts of those who had witnessed it, whether in the store or on their screens. The story of Naomi Carter was no longer just about jewelry or business. It was about legacy, a legacy of justice, dignity, and the quiet but unbreakable strength of a leader who never forgot where she came from and never stopped fighting for a world where respect was the most valuable treasure of all. Thank you so much for watching this story. If it moved you, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful stories.